Today we're talking to Anna Hales, who teaches commercial law in the University of Auckland's MBA program. Kia ora, Anna.
Hi.
What is commercial law and why is it important?
Well, commercial law is law which impacts on businesses. So it's really important for anyone in business to understand the framework within which their business is operating, but also to understand how law can help them.
Most MBAs focus on management and leadership. What was the rationale behind including law in this program?
Well, having law in our MBA is one of our unique selling points at the University of Auckland. And the reason is that actually it's something which business people really enjoy learning about and find very useful because, as I said, law is sort of a framework within which businesses operate, so that the rules of engagement for business. But as well as that, it's really important for business people to understand how the law can help them. So if you come up with a new idea or a new invention, for example, IP law can help you in terms of protecting that from a competitor.
Law's been included in the MBA before. What was the feedback you got from previous students?
So we've been delivering law on the MBA for a number of years now, but it was always a half course that I shared with economics. And economics and law do sit really nicely together, but the problem was that students just wanted more. They wanted more of economics and they wanted more law because law is huge. We canvassed students' opinions, they were all demanding, come on, let's have more, so we've doubled the size of the course, which is great.
Do students need to have any prerequisite law foundational stuff before they come in, or can you literally come in with no experience at all?
Yes, absolutely. You can come in with no legal knowledge at all. Some of our MBA students will have legal backgrounds, but the vast majority won't have done any law at all in the past. So we start from the very beginning and we work up. We're not trying to turn our students into lawyers. This is all about law for business.
Law seems like such an enormous subject. Where do you start?
It is huge, and it's been one of the challenges of designing this course, is deciding which topic areas to include and which not. I took feedback from previous students about that, and I'm hoping that we've come up with a really nice course overview which touches on a number of areas of law which are really relevant to business. In terms of where we start at the very beginning. We talk about what law is, we talk about the sources of law, so where law comes from. We talk about the constitution of the country, so we look at things like the treaty and the legal status of the treaty particularly. And from there we look at things like the three arms of government, so we've got government, parliament and the courts. We look at the relationship between them, how they act as a check and balance on each other. And we also talk about politics, which always gets people interested and engaged. So we discuss all about our voting system. We talk about how, in the context of how law's made, we look at how legislation goes through Parliament. And students are always pleasantly surprised to know how accessible the New Zealand Parliament is. It's particularly accessible. They're very keen to have input from industry experts. So business people in New Zealand are actively encouraged to make submissions to select committees to have their views known about proposed laws that Parliament's looking at and things like that. So we spend quite a lot of time honing students' skills so that they can prepare themselves to get involved with lawmaking should they so wish.
Wow, so it's very broad to start with. Yeah. You mentioned the treaty.
Yeah.
I wonder if you also cover te tiriti.
Yes, so we look at the differences in interpretation, and that of course is the key issue from a lawyer's point of view, because to turn something into law you need to know exactly what it says, and that's the crux of the issue. Without giving anyone any spoilers about when we talk about legal enforceability of the treaty, it's very difficult because of the disagreement about what the treaty actually says. So we explore how the law can help to make sure that the treaty is honoured in the absence of very, very clear wording.
Incredible. So there's the big broad overview, and then do you get granular? And when you do get granular, because I'm sure you do, what are the sorts of pillars that you might look at?
Yeah, so from that kind of general overview, so we look at basically the big legal framework within which all businesses in New Zealand operate and how law's made. We then move into specific areas of law. and we start with contract law, because contract law is probably the most pervasive area of law in the world, in the sense that we're all entering into contracts every single day. We're getting on the bus, we're buying a coffee, we're going to work, contracts. So of course you scale that up to businesses. Businesses are engaging in contracts all of the time with suppliers, manufacturers, customers, staff, whatever it might be. So contract law is a fundamental area of law. So we look at that first.
And do you do employment law? Do you do consumer law? Are there other lenses that you look at it through?
Yep. So from that sort of foundation, both of the areas of law you've mentioned are based on contract law, of course. So we have consumer law. That's all contracts. So you're going to a shop, you're buying something. So we look at the difference with consumer contracts, and that is that actually, because when you go and buy something from a shop, your ability to negotiate is quite limited, isn't it? So if you think about, two businesses might be negotiating a deal, they can kind of agree whatever they want, freedom of contract. But if you go and buy a phone in a shop, or you subscribe to Netflix or whatever, you have very limited scope to negotiate on price and terms and that sort of thing. So for that reason, Parliament has legislated to protect the consumer, because we're the weaker party in that scenario. So we have things like the Consumer Guarantees Act and the Fair Trading Act, which are there to protect us. So consumer law's a bit different because the legislation comes in and really helps. So we look at that. The Fair Trading Act is about things like advertising. So what can businesses say when they market their products and their services? So does Red Bull really give you wings? And that sort of thing. Consumer guarantees is more about, if you buy something that's faulty, can you demand a refund? What are your rights under the law? It also covers things like, if you go and you buy an appliance and you've always got that pushy sales guy who's saying, hey, do you want an extra extended warranty? We look at the circumstances in which that might be helpful. Most of the time, it's actually not necessary.
One of the other contracts that you were talking about earlier was employment contracts. Do you cover that as well?
Yeah, so everyone in New Zealand who's an employee should have a written employment contract. They don't always, but they should have. So we look at employment law. Employment law is something that students are always really interested in. It doesn't matter whether they're actually working in HR, everyone is interested in employment law. So we look at things like the difference between employees and contractors, for example, and there's quite an interesting case going through the courts at the moment involving the status of Uber drivers, for example. Are they contractors or are they employees? The reason that matters is because, of course, employees have minimum rights like parental leave, annual leave, minimum wage, all of those things, which independent contractors don't get. The other thing employees get, which independent contractors don't get, is a right to raise what's called a personal grievance for unjustified dismissal. So we have a look at that. We also look at things like how businesses can restructure and move people around, make people redundant if they need to, without falling foul of the law. So we look at disciplinary procedures and we look at dismissals as well.
One of the other aspects of law that I was wondering if you cover is things like IP law, or now that we're here having this discussion, it seems enormous, doesn't it? But IP, non-disclosures, things like that.
Yeah.
Copyright.
Yep, so we cover all of that sort of thing. So we look at, we start out by looking at things like privacy. We look at the Privacy Act. What can companies do with the data they collect about their customers? The Spam Act, so electronic messaging and what businesses are allowed to do around that. And we move from that to looking at things like protecting business secrets. So how do you protect your information as a business? Often that again comes back to contract law. So employment contracts will often have a confidentiality clause, so employees can't go down to the pub and start talking about what they've been doing at work. Or talk to competitors, that sort of thing. Non-disclosure agreements, we look at those as well. So those are often used. So for example, if you came up with a new manufacturing process and you wanted to discuss its viability with a manufacturer, but you didn't want that manufacturer to steal your idea or sell it to a competitor, non-disclosure agreements are the way to go there. So we look at all of that. And we move on from that to look at something slightly that's related, which is patent law. So that's part of intellectual property law. So you might want to patent a new invention, for example, and we look at the pros and cons of doing that. Famously, Coca-Cola, for example, has never patented its recipe because there are downsides to patenting. So we look at that sort of thing. It's still in the context of IP law. We then look at things like copyright law and registered trademarks. So how businesses can, if they spend a fortune on marketing, and then how do they protect their brand? How do they protect their reputation? So we look at all of that as well, which is quite exciting.
Very exciting. You also have a module on negotiations?
We do, yep. So my colleague Andrew Patterson is an expert in negotiation and mediation. So he comes in to deliver a module on negotiation. And what he's looking at there is the science of negotiation, what makes a successful negotiator. And he's got some stellar, world-class negotiators coming in as guest speakers, and that's it will be fantastic. And we included it with this particular paper because lawyers are negotiating all the time. It's a key skill. When I'm teaching my law students, negotiation is something that we teach to them because it's something lawyers have to do as part of their job. So negotiation and law go really, really well together. And we thought actually for the MBA, it's an ideal vehicle for teaching some of the law through the lens of negotiation. So students get that opportunity to really hone their negotiating skills, which we all use in a work context as well as a domestic one every day.
Is it largely theoretical, or do they actually get an opportunity to practice it? Because sometimes things make sense on paper and then in real life can be...
Yeah, so they study the theory of negotiation, but then they put it into practice. So they get a lot of opportunity to practice, as I said, in the context of commercial law. So they'll have a commercial law problem or case study to negotiate on, and they'll go off in their pairs and get lots of time to practice and hone their skills.
Wonderful. Do you look at AI?
Yes, we do. I'm very excited. This is new for the course this year. So AI is so fast moving, it's almost impossible to design in advance because by the time we get there, things will have moved on again. So I've come up with a new way of dealing with it, which I'm so excited about. So we'll look at AI from a legal perspective. And the reason it's so interesting from a legal perspective is that it covers things like privacy law, which we'll have studied already at this point. AI comes in right at the end. So we look at things like facial recognition technology and how does that infringe our privacy rights, and how does AI use the information that it has gleaned about us, and all of those issues come into privacy law. But the other interesting area of law that it impacts upon is competition law. There's only a few major players who are developing those AI tools, which means they've got market dominance, and that potentially has competition law issues. So we look at that. But the way we're actually going to deal with it with the students when we get there is I've lined up the most amazing AI panel, and we have a legal expert, a practitioner, who's a data and tech partner at a big law firm in Auckland. We have an academic, a legal academic, whose research specialism is AI. We have a Maori data sovereignty expert coming in. And we have a technical expert, so a guy who has developed his own AI tool, which is being used by a large engineering consultancy.
Wow, that sounds incredible.
So they're going to do a wonderful Q&A, and students will get lots and lots of time. MBA students love asking lots of questions and really discussing and deep diving, so they'll get plenty of time to really grill the panel and get all their questions answered. So it'll be great.
Very cool. How accessible will this information be to international students that perhaps come here and study and then go back to their home country? Because we are talking specifically about, particularly in the beginning of the paper, about Aotearoa.
So I found when I started teaching this paper, one of the things that really resonated with me was that I was teaching about the influence of tikanga in the workplace. And we were having lots of really engaging discussions in the class about this, people coming forward with their own experiences from their own businesses and so on. At the end of the class, a few international students came up to me and said, wow, we didn't know anything about tikanga before because we didn't go to high school here. We didn't know that it was a thing. We certainly didn't know it was something we should be mindful of when we're conducting business in New Zealand. So people like that particularly find it very, very enlightening to learn about those things.
Are you excited about Dr. Kitty Dow's paper?
Yes, yes, it looks amazing. Yes, and in fact, I have a sneak preview, so I've been looking at it because it's fascinating. Yeah. And it's going to be beautiful because the students will finish that, and then we lead into looking at legal enforceability of the treaty on my course and tikanga in the workplace and all of those things. So it will flow on really nicely, I think.
For New Zealand students who want to do an MBA, but then perhaps want to go and do an OE, what are the takeouts from your course that they can take away and be valuable for them abroad?
Well, studying law gives you transferable skills. Studying law helps you with your ability to research, your ability to analyse, your ability to apply, your ability to communicate. They will be exposed to lots of debates and discussions, and so all of those skills, as well as negotiation, of course, will be things that they've honed on the course. In terms of the actual legal knowledge, every country has its own legal system, so it's not that you can take a New Zealand law paper and just go and use it in the UK. Having said that, New Zealand law is based on English law, but of course there are differences. So it's not directly transferable, but it does give you an awareness that actually as you travel around the world and you're in different countries, every country will have its own form of constitutional law, employment law, IP protection, all of those things. So it will raise an awareness that there are these rules, but they will vary from jurisdiction to jurisdiction.
So which part of the course are you most looking forward to teaching?
I love all of it. I think the best thing about this course is that you get to look at so many different areas of law. And everyone will have their favourite. They'll have and I always do a poll at the end, and so students will say, well, this was my favourite, this was the most interesting, but they'll also then, I'll ask which was the most useful. That's not always the same thing, but they tend to have particular areas that they didn't know that they wanted to know about, and actually that's really useful. I'm so glad that I've learnt that. So I love teaching all of it. I'm particularly excited about the AI panel though, because I think that's just going to be so fulfilling for the students to be able to just ask whatever they want and to have a range of experts who are at the cutting edge of their field. I think that's just going to be fantastic.
I have to know what they like the most. What do they find most interesting?
Okay, they actually find things like consumer and contract law really interesting, but having said that, we're introducing a load of new areas that they haven't covered before. So there was huge demand to cover intellectual property law, for example, huge demand to cover competition law. So we look at anti-competitive behaviour. So you're having a cup of coffee with someone and that conversation could land you in hot water if you're making agreements about how you run your respective businesses. So students find that really fascinating. So there's a lot of new stuff coming in. So I wouldn't want to prejudge which one they're going to find the most interesting this year.
And what do they find most useful?
Contract law, generally,
Yes.
Yeah.
Including employment law, all of those really important things that we can take with us wherever we go.
I think so, and I think particularly because it's just something that's so pervasive to every aspect of life. And contract law actually is one of those areas of law that is quite similar in other common law jurisdictions like the UK and Australia. So it is a bit more of a transferable area of law.
Wonderful. Best of luck for your course. If you found this topic interesting and want to learn more, please check out the Waipapa Taumataro University of Auckland's MBA program.